Welcome back to the channel, guys, and the next video in Mega March. Ooh boy, I've been dying to talk about this one on the channel forever. It's no secret that since the original Mega Man X, the blonde-haired Reploid Zero has always been a fan favorite, which is why Keiji Inafune brought Zero back after his death in the first game. What do you do when a supporting character in your game series becomes so popular that he eclipses the main character? Well, first you make him playable, of course. But eventually that's not enough, and so you give him his own spin-off series. Cue to the release of Mega Man Zero on the Game Boy Advance, which caused no end of confusion for a while as most people didn't understand the title was just to stay on brand, and that Zero isn't a new Mega Man. The game is set roughly 100 years after the end of the Mega Man X series, which was supposed to be X5, where both Sigma and Zero both supposedly died once and for all, but Capcom wasn't keen on letting the X series end just yet, and to justify the existence of X6, 7, and 8, the timeline was moved to the vague point of the end of the X series. The game's opening reminds me a lot of the beginning of the Terminator, with the Resistance Force being chased down and killed by an army of machines. Man, the Maverick threat has really gotten out of control in the future, huh? Well, not quite. As the Resistance Force is slowly whittled down, their leader, a young girl named Seal, finds the underground lab the group was searching for. And who should be hidden away in this lab than our old pal Zero? Though he's looking a little different than I remember. Where's your boob lights, mister? Enemy forces closing in, Seal and her cyber elf Passy reactivate Zero just in time to save the day. Unfortunately, 100 years have taken its toll on the Red Reploid, as Zero has no memories of his past, and even worse, seems to have lost his Z-Saber. This little handicap bites him in the ass almost immediately, as while the cannon fodder are easy enough to handle with just a buster, the giant golem boss who snatches Seal is on a whole nother level. Is this it? Destined to die on the tutorial boss like a Dark Souls game? Nah, of course not. Thanks to some weird blue soul thingy, Zero gets his saber back and one-shots the golem. Seal then thanks him for saving her and brings Zero back to the Resistance base. So what exactly is going on here? Well, during the 100 or so years that Zero has been inactive, the world somehow managed to get even worse. It's not directly stated outright what happened, at least not in this game, but to sum it up, the Maverick Crisis got even worse. A good chunk of the world and its population, both human and Reploid, were all wiped out. This really looked like the end, until good old X gathered up the survivors and founded the city of Neo Arcadia. Here, he would lead as a benevolent ruler, guaranteeing equality for humans and Reploids, until an energy crisis hit the city. Suddenly, X goes full dictator mode, declares Reploids second-class citizens, with him and his government labeling any dissidents as Mavericks, and having them retired. Seal, having been a scientist in Neo Arcadia's employ, defects and forms the Resistance, trying to build a safe haven for innocent Reploids on the run from Neo Arcadia. So what the hell happened? Did our good buddy X finally become a monster like the ones he's hunted for years? Well, not exactly, but we'll talk about that later. So the game turns the narrative of the X series on its head, with Zero now aiding the group branded as Mavericks against what's supposed to be the good guys. Zero's mission is to now assist the Resistance, and hopefully find a way to fight back against Neo Arcadia. Now, right off the bat, things are a lot different than the X series. The first and most obvious is the art style. It ditched the X series' more traditional anime style for artwork by Toru Nakayama, who gave the Zero series a softer look with more pastel colors, removing the sharper design of Reploids along with giving them simpler looks. While it's died down now, I do remember the art style being controversial, mainly with Zero's redesign, as he looked radically different, looked more girly, and ditched his iconic boob lights. Personally, I never minded the art style change, and at first I kinda just chalked it up to the game taking place farther in the future. So Reploid designs would have had to have changed over the 100 years that have passed. Though I think my only problem with it was that it was hard to know who was human and who was a Reploid, unless they stated in-game. Though this may have been intentional, as explained in further games. Next is that you don't have the usual 8 stages with 8 bosses to choose from. The game follows an objective-based mission structure, having to rescue hostages, retrieve data, or disable a weapon belonging to Neo Arcadia. These missions aren't really set in unique stages either, as you'll usually return to the same area several times to complete objectives. The game does open up new paths in these areas though, so it stops things from feeling boring and repetitive. You will still encounter bosses, but not always, and technically none of them are Mavericks. Also, the bosses don't drop abilities like they did in the previous series. Instead, during gameplay, you get a hold of 3 elemental chips. These will imbue Zero's weapons with either lightning, fire, or ice when fully charged. Along with his saber and Z-Buster, Zero also makes use of 2 more weapons. The triple rod that lets him attack in 8 different directions, and the boomerang shield that can deflect projectiles and can be thrown at enemies when fully charged. The elemental chips take the place of boss weaknesses, doing more damage to them and occasionally stunning them in battle. But refreshingly, some bosses don't have a weakness, so you can't just brute force them. Now if there's one thing this series is known for, it's just how much more difficult it is compared to the regular series. And there's several reasons for that. First is how your weapons work in this game. Due to Zero's hibernation sickness, he's lost a lot of the skill and power he had back in his prime. So he'll have to grind up his skills in order to actually stand a chance. Sounds simple, right? Well, not exactly. The reason being, the game doesn't tell you anything about this. You may not even realize that your skills are all that diminished, as regular enemies will go down in a few hits like it's nothing. It becomes extremely apparent the second you step into your first boss battle, against Aztec Falcon. Now this entire fight is a nightmare if you walk into it blind, as Aztec Falcon hits hard, tanks your hits, and more importantly, the fight is timed, as if you don't kill him fast enough, he'll kill the hostages you're supposed to rescue. And because this mission immediately precedes the opening level, there aren't a lot of options to prepare for him like getting sub-tanks or armor. That is, unless you take the time to grind out your saber, and learn the charge saber attack. Now grinding isn't that hard, and doesn't really take that long either. Just kill enemies over and over again with the same weapon, and it'll level up. Give it 20 minutes or so and you're ready to fight Aztec Falcon. But like I just mentioned, nothing in the game tells you that. And what's worse, there's actually a hidden XP system to level up your weapons too. I know I just simplified it to kill a bunch of enemies with a weapon, but you also have to take into account how you kill them with that weapon. I know, a little confusing. Your weapon can be leveled up several times. For example, the Z-Saber has 7 levels to it. Now if you use your regular slash on enemies, you unlock your 2-hit combo, then your 3-hit combo, and finally the charge slash. But if instead you use a jumping slash on your enemies, you'll unlock your spinning air slash first. Making use of the different combos to kill an enemy will end up gaining you more XP and cut down on the amount of grind needed. Now thankfully, despite the early grind, this doesn't make the game a complete cakewalk. It seems the devs learned a lot from the Maverick fights in the X series, so they changed certain things around this time. First is that not every boss will fight you in an area with walls, so you can't just hide in the corner of a wall to avoid attacks. Next is the varied movesets a boss will have. For example, after fighting Aztec Falcon, chances are the next fight you have is Maha Ganesharif. He's a large elephant-like Reploid who's stolen data about Zero's hibernation. He fights by rolling up into a ball and trying to ram into Zero, needing you to jump over him. But he also drops a bomb behind him, so chances are you're going to land right on it after jumping over him. He can also attach his trunk to the ceiling to swing himself around like a wrecking ball. And finally pulls an E-Honda, using the 100-hand slap attack. While he's weak to the electric chip, and you can get some decent damage on him with the fully charged saber, it can be hard to hit him with his constant movement. And the fact the attack doesn't stun him long enough for you to recharge for another hit. Also, side note, I love that the bosses have actual names here. If you watched my X2 and X3 video, you know I just hate it when a boss is just an element and an animal name combined. I mean, yeah, that's still here to an extent with Aztec Falcon, assuming you consider Aztec an element. But names like Anubis Necromancis, Blizzak Stagroth, or Herculeus Antius are way more creative than something like Sand Jackal, or Blizzard Stag, or Electric Beetle. Now, I brought up subtanks and armor previously, which are technically in the game, but in the form of a new mechanic known as Cyber Elves. Cyber Elves are sentient computer programs that are kinda like digital fairies. They can be found scattered throughout the game, hidden in certain areas, or dropped by regular enemies and bosses. They offer a ton of different abilities, being able to increase Zero's health, save him from a pit, increase his defense, or weaken enemies. To get their full potential though, you need to use energy crystals to feed them, so they can evolve and unlock their full power. Energy crystals can be collected in stages and tend to drop off most enemies. While I like the idea of Cyber Elves, they feel really half-baked in this game. First is that it takes a ton of crystals to level one up. We're talking hundreds if not a few thousand to level up a single Cyber Elf. And enemies drop just a handful at a time. And unlike future games, there's no way to increase drops, so you're stuck farming for them for a while. Second, and my bigger problem with Cyber Elves, is the game penalizes you for using them. At the end of each mission, you're graded by how well you did, based on how fast you complete a level, how much damage you take, how many retries you use, and if you used a Cyber Elf or not. Using a Cyber Elf gets you an instant minus 20 points from your score. And if you permanently upgrade Zero with one, it never goes away. I don't really understand why Capcom would bother to introduce a new mechanic if they were just going to punish the player for using it. While thankfully your rank doesn't mean much outside of access to Seal's room and a secret Cyber Elf, it just feels so hostile. Future games would just punish you for using certain overpowered elves instead. After doing a few missions, you'll eventually encounter the 4 Guardians of Neo Arcadia. 4 powerful Reploids based off of X's designs who serve as the generals of his military. They're Sage Harpuya, Fighting Fefnir, Fairy Leviathan, and Hidden Phantom. The 4 of them are a step up in difficulty compared to their underlings, though the first 3 can be handled well enough with the right weakness. Phantom, not so much. He doesn't have a weakness, and is insanely fast, quick to close the gap with Zero or jump away. He'll throw shurikens, slash at you with his sword, or try to ambush you while using shadow clones. He hits like a truck and can demolish you if you don't learn to keep your distance. More than likely, he'll be the first boss where you're forced to either use a sub-tank or a Cyber Elf to increase your defense. And things only go from bad to worse if you manage to beat him in his mission, as the annoying asshole has rigged the factory you fought him in to explode. You're now on a timer as you have to search for and disarm the 8 bombs scattered in the level. This wouldn't be so bad, except it requires some precise jumps on moving platforms. And due to the GBA's limited screen space, it could be hard to see where you're landing when trying to get back on the platforms. Also, if you die, you end up using a life and having to redo the whole thing, which is another reason why this game is considered so hard. Extra lives are really hard to come by in this game, and if you fail a level, it's considered an instant game over, having to use a retry to give it another go. Use up all your retries and you either have to reload your last save, or the mission is considered a failure, getting locked out of any Cyber Elves or Elemental chips that were in the level. The Legacy Collection does fix this though, with the option to turn on Save Assist, spawning these small checkpoints in levels where you can respawn after death. Skipping ahead to the end of the game, Zero eventually takes the fight to Neo Arcadia, teleporting into the city, fighting his way through, and doing the whole fight 8 bosses in a teleport room shtick. Before he can confront his old buddy X and bring his tyranny to an end, Seal reveals a shocking secret. The X who rules over Neo Arcadia isn't the original X, but a copy made by her.
I am shocked! Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Yeah, honestly, it's not really a twist. The game sets it up right after Seal first resurrects Zero. Though apparently they did toy with the idea of going through with it and having the real X become the bad guy. And while I think it's a pretty interesting idea, you know, the whole fallen hero, he who fights monsters trope, I think it just ends up ruining X's journey. Shitting all over Dr. Light's vision of a world of harmony between man and machine, led by X's example. That said, Copy X himself isn't really all that interesting. He isn't all that fleshed out, and his blind devotion to humans and hatred towards Reploids doesn't really seem to stem from anything. Just the whole taking his programming to the extreme idea. As a final boss, he's pretty underwhelming too, as his attacks are pretty slow and easily telegraphed. His second phase is a little better, having to use the platforms on either side to bounce up and hit him, and his attacks do more damage too. But him being stationary the whole time still makes him a chump. Copy X defeated, he blows himself up in one last desperate attempt to take Zero with him, before our hero escapes Neo Arcadia. Knocked out, a voice talks to Zero. It's the blue glowing spirit thing that gave him his saber back at the beginning of the game. And you won't believe it, guys. It was the real X all along.
This man is overgasped!
Okay, yeah, this one was another obvious reveal. X fills him in on what happened while Zero was napping the last 100 years. As I explained at the beginning, X did indeed gather up the remaining humans and Reploids and built the city of Neo Arcadia, where everyone could live as equals. Unfortunately, the Maverick Menace was still a constant threat during that time, and eventually the non-stop fighting got too much for the guy. So he just walked away from it all, disappearing one day, eventually replaced by Copy X. While this is a little better than him going full-blown tyrant, it's still kind of a shitty thing to see from someone like X, even though it's pretty understandable. Hundreds of years fighting the same enemy, and with little to no support, and with humans and Reploids dying constantly, I think it would get to anyone. The following game retcons this and gives a much better explanation for his disappearance, but I'll talk about that in a future video. X asks his longtime friend to carry on the fight, and let him rest just a little while longer. Zero wakes up to find himself surrounded by an army of Neo Arcadia forces. Lighting up his saber, he agrees and promises X he'll keep fighting as his iconic theme plays and the credits roll. So what did I think about Mega Man Zero? Well, it was a good start for Zero's own series. It changed up the normal X formula enough to give this series its own identity, and not just feel like playing as Zero and X4 again. The change in art style, while a bit controversial for its time, I feel matches this series really well, and helps sell the impression of a war-torn world on the brink, especially in later games. And the increase in difficulty was really appreciated, as most boss fights had become really stale and would end in seconds with the right weapon in the X series. Here, while there was still an elemental weakness system in place, bosses had a variety of moves to make up for it. Had more health so fights would still be a bit longer and wouldn't end up getting stun locked either. And the arenas you fought them in were changed up to limit your options of attack. That said, the retry system in the original GBA version was a bit unfair, especially since lives were so hard to come by. But despite the good and new things that it did, it really falls short in other areas, especially compared to what the sequels would do later. First is the story. I do like the idea of Mavericks going from Reploids going berserk from a virus to just being a label for anyone who's a dissident of Neo Arcadia. It's an idea that's kind of brought up during the Day of Sigma OVA in the Maverick Hunter X game, along with the dynamic of Zero essentially playing the role of a Maverick this time. While it has an interesting setup and an interesting location, it really doesn't flesh it out that much. There's not that many cutscenes in between missions, and the plot doesn't really progress at all that much, making it feel too much like X5 and X6 that preceded it. The characters themselves aren't fleshed out either. Zero is very stoic, an unfortunate side effect of having lost his memories, his original personality not really popping up until the very end. So he doesn't really say a lot during missions, almost never responding in conversations with bosses. Seal fares a little better. Her desire to help the Reploids and make up for her mistake of creating Copy X, serving as good motivators for her. especially with her working towards a balanced solution and creating a new power source, and ending the energy crisis that put humans and Reploids against each other. But you don't really learn much outside of that, like for example how she built Copy X and why she was chosen for the task. Here's a fun fact you might not know. Did you know Seal is actually 14 years old in the first game? Not only that, but according to the official complete works book about the series, she was 6 years old when she built Copy X. That's absolutely insane. While the child genius thing doesn't hurt her character or the story, I think some of that would be great to learn about in the game itself, and not through some data book. Like hearing about her struggles and the expectations put on her at such a young age to replicate a machine as complex as X. As you might recall, Dr. Kane tried himself in the past, giving birth to the Reploid race and by extension the Maverick problem. So Copy X coming out the way he did wasn't exactly surprising, but you'd think the powers in charge would have known that. And then there's Copy X himself, the tyrant and leader of Neo Arcadia. The game just doesn't give you enough time with him. He's talked about all game but doesn't show up until the final battle. He has a certain respect for Zero as he tells his guardians to back off and that he'll handle his old friend, but we don't know anything else about him. Was he a decent replacement for X for a time? Did he instantly decide to start persecuting Reploids because of the energy shortage? Or was someone else pulling the strings? His underwhelming boss fights don't help matters either, though that may have been intentional as Zero goes out of his way to point out he's weaker than the original. There's hints that he has an obsession with perfection, and other media indicate he may suffer from an inferiority complex, but that doesn't really get shown here. And finally, the Cyber Elves. While a cool idea when it comes to collectibles, they're bogged down by how long it takes to level them up and how the game penalizes you for using them in the first place. So they feel like more of a hassle to use than a fun new mechanic to explore and play with. To sum up my thoughts, I think Mega Man Zero is a good game that gets eclipsed by its sequels. It has a good foundation, but things like its ranking system and the Cyber Elves don't really feel fully fleshed out yet. And the gripping story it's known for hasn't really gotten started yet. But the gameplay is fun, the difficulty feels balanced, even if you're not using the save assist, and it has a bit of replay value with a hard mode that nerfs all your weapons and really ranks up the challenge. Mega Man Zero was a good showing for everyone's favorite red Reploid. One that would propel him forward in creating one of, if not the best of the spin-off Mega Man series. And that's the video. Thanks for watching, guys. This video will probably come out a little later than usual, most likely a day or two after my birthday. Mega March has been proceeding nicely, and I appreciate everyone commenting on the videos and who have been enjoying them too. Got one more video planned out to round out the month, hopefully get it out before the month ends. After Mega March, I'm thinking of doing some varied videos before tackling a big series project I want to work on. You may see some more impressions or discussion videos pop up, depending on what games I'm playing or what things get announced, or just what happens to be on my mind. Again, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like down below. Did you play the first Mega Man Zero? Do you enjoy his series? Do you miss his boob lights? Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. And if you're new to my channel, I'd appreciate if you subscribed. I'm FuzzySlippers, and I'll see you later. Peace.